Welcome to another edition of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Halowali. I have with me today a trial attorney for over 24 years. He has argued before different courts in Ohio, even all the way to the Supreme Court. And he not just only argues, he has been very successful at doing it.
Thank you.
He's been practicing for over 24 years. He's currently a judicial candidate of the Court of Common Pleas in Franklin County,
That's
Ohio.
right. That's right.
His name is Carl Aveni. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for honoring this invitation. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? Because I know more about you, but I want them to know you too.
Well, it's my pleasure. So I have been a trial lawyer for 24 years. I grew up in a small city just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, a place called Brockton, Massachusetts, and it's a place that had fallen on some hard times. It used to be a very prosperous city, filled with, it was the shoe manufacturing capital of the world in about 1900. And by the time that I graduated from high school, it was all those factories had closed. And so I grew up in a town that was trying to figure out what sort of opportunity it still had left and its identity. And that was a bit of a struggle for a while. I bounced around the East Coast. I went to law school and eventually came to Columbus, Ohio in 1998 when my wife took a job as the director of the Russian language program at Ohio State University. And we have been here since 1998 and just love Central Ohio. It's been a real privilege for us.
Wow. What prompted you to decide to go to law school and become an attorney?
Well, I've been arguing with people all my life. No, it was the natural evolution of my interests and the things that I'm good at. I had a lot of jobs growing up as a kid. I worked as a professional clown for 10 years when I was a little kid. That's true. That's part of how we paid for college for me was from 5 to 15. I worked as a professional clown at kids' birthday parties. I worked on pig farms when I was younger. Newspaper boy. So I've had a broad array of jobs that I was not always great at, and they all sort of pushed me to a career in the law, which was something that was a natural fit for my personality. So it has been a joy and deeply rewarding.
Wow, that is quite interesting. Carl Clown Cartoon.
It's true. And I was a funny story. I was a contestant on Jeopardy, the game show Jeopardy in 2011, and you're supposed to tell a interesting story about yourself. And so I said that I'd worked as a professional clown. And if you look for that clip, you can have a laugh, the 30 seconds where I'm trying to explain how being a lawyer and being a professional clown are sort of two sides of the same thing. They're not, but I thought it was funny.
It is funny. And I believe you actually met your wife 3 days of, your third day in college.
Yes, I did. You have done your research. Yes. I met my wife on the third day of college as a freshman and was smitten from day one.
Okay, and you were studying to go into like international law, and she was studying Russian.
That's right.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of life's ironies that we took Russian together in freshman year of college, and just as I was figuring out, boy, this is really not for me, and I'm not particularly skilled at Russian, she was thinking, hey, I could make a career of this. I love this. So here we are.
Yeah. And you're currently running for judge. 2 years ago, I think you were in a race for judge too, but it was a very tight.
That's right.
Race. You lost to another candidate. 2 years, you're back.
I did, yes. So I ran in 2018, and I lost that race by 931, a swing of 931 individual votes out of 365,000 votes cast. So very, very, very close, much less than half of 1%. Well, I guess it was about half of 1% by the time we were done. And it took about 4 extra weeks to recount all the ballots and make sure that they had the right person as the winner, just because it was so very close. And that was that was a lesson in how important voting is, because at one point on election night at about 11:15 p.m., I was up by 7 individual votes out of about 360,000 votes at that point. And I had 8 people in the room with me. And so I said, I hope you all voted, because if you didn't, we're going to have to talk about this. So I did end up losing that race. That was too close for me to leave it alone. So I'm back again, running again.
Yeah. And the election has already started. People have started voting. Election day itself is in about 2 weeks.
That's right.
And so, in your view, how important are judicial contests within the framework of our democracy?
So I personally, and I know not everybody agrees with me on this, and it's sometimes kind of a controversial statement when I make it, but I will make it. I think judges are more directly responsible and have a more direct impact on people's lives than any other branch of government. When you're standing in front of a judge, that judge has the ability to change the trajectory of your life for better or for worse, in ways that are permanent, that are direct, and are much more impactful than a mayor or a city council or a congressperson or even the president of the United States. And one of the difficult things about that, so number one, I think judges are critically important, that we have folks that have the right scholarship, but also the right sense of compassion. But on the other hand, it's so hard for people to figure out who the judges are. We're kind of a mysterious group, the judicial candidates. We're just a bunch of names. It doesn't even list the party affiliation on the ballot. And it's hard for people to figure out what are the right qualities, who has the right qualities. Should we support this person or that person? And as a result, we sometimes, folks just pass over the judges on their ballot when they're voting because they don't know who to vote for.
That's exactly one of the questions I was going to ask you, because most often times people don't know who to vote for, and sometimes they're not even sure what bearing their decision is when it comes to who their judges.
Yep.
So, what do you want to tell people who think, you know what, I don't care who the judges, so I'm going to leave that blank. What do you want to say to people like that?
Well, if I hope you never find yourself a victim of crime. I hope you never find yourself wrongly accused of something you never did. I hope that you never find yourself in a breach of contract or business dispute or in a car accident. But most of us at some point in our lives will have something happen to us that brings us to a courthouse. And at that point, when you get in front of a judge, it's too late to figure out whether you've got a good and skilled judge or not. So if you want to have good and skilled judges serving your community, for yourself, for your neighbors, for your friends and family, for your community as a whole, we need to choose the right judges during the election times. So I would encourage everyone that's listening to this to do a little bit of research. There is information out there, and figure out who has the experience, the scholarship, the fairness, but also the sense of compassion and the sense of the big picture of the critical issues facing our community and how the judiciary fits into that. And if you cast your votes in those ways, it won't stop you from ever being in front of a judge, perhaps, one way or another, but you'll have some comfort that the judge will be a scholar of the law and a compassionate human being.
Thank you. Yeah, recently Justice Ginsburg, which is she's a justice of the Supreme Court, she
Right.
died. And the debate has been going on as to who's going to be a replacement. Some people are wondering why they cannot vote for justices of the US Supreme Court and federal judges. Can you give them an explanation as to why?
Sure. So
why not?
Sure. So on the federal system, we sort of have two systems of courts. So we have the state system of courts. Here in Ohio, it's the Ohio Courts of Common Pleas and Court of Appeal and Ohio Supreme Court, and they're all elected. And then we have the federal system, where all of the judges in the federal system are appointed and confirmed by the president and confirmed by the United States Senate. And both approaches have their merits. A lot of folks say, well, we shouldn't be electing judges, and I actually understand and appreciate that perspective. It is the system that we have in Ohio. Some states don't have elected judges. They have appointed judges. But, as you can see with what's happening in the national headlines right now, it's also tricky when we have appointments. That's a political process as well. And it's almost impossible to remove the politics from choosing your judges, whether you're directly electing them or not. So the most we can hope for is that one way or the other, whichever system you happen to be in, the right people find themselves in service on the bench. In trying cases for 24 years, I have been in front of some really wonderful judges all over the state. And I've also had the misfortune to be in front of some judges that were less wonderful. And, the ones that I think are the most frustrating are the judges that are very bright, very talented, know the law very well, but manage to make their service on the bench about their own ego rather than about serving the community. And those judges have the ability to really hurt people if they're in a careless way, because they make it all about them. And the best judges that I've ever been in front of, and in a 24-year career, have approached the bench with a measure of humility, as well as scholarship, and recognize that it is a position of service. It is a position where you have the ability to change the trajectory of people's lives at critical moments. There are certainly people that are dangerous for the community and need to be incarcerated. And I'm not going to argue that otherwise, but there are also people that just need help, and they're seeing you on some of the worst days of their lives. And there are alternatives sometimes that allow you to get them into programs, into diversion or something like that. And they can be redeemed. They can be saved. And not only are you saving them, sometimes you're saving their children, you're saving their family members. You're changing the trajectory, not of just that one person, but of the concentric circles of people around them in that community. And if you have that ability and you're able to do that, what a rare privilege that is. So.
Yeah, in your 24 years of being a trial attorney, have you ever had cases where you think or you believe that having the right judge made a whole lot of difference for you and your client?
Yes, absolutely. Now, sometimes, and this is going to sound strange, but sometimes having the right judge has made a difference, and I lost the case. That's also possible, where sometimes people, the clients that I've represented, have needed more than to win. They needed to be heard. They needed to be recognized. They needed to be understood. And having the right judge in that moment gave them some measure of the closure that they needed in their life, even if they didn't win the case. And that is counterintuitive. It's not something I would have expected, but it really does happen. So yes, having the right judge, almost independent of the outcome of the case. And of course, sometimes cases are decided by the judge. Sometimes cases are decided by juries in our system as well. And, regardless of who wins or loses, for most litigants, it is critically important to feel like they had a fair shot and they had a chance to have their say. And a good judge will give them that, regardless of the outcome of the case.
Thank you. Yeah, in Ohio, we elect our judges, both state and local judges. So, how accountable are elected judges to the people, even though they're elected?
So they are accountable, and they should be accountable. The idea of having an independent judiciary means that we serve terms, the judges serve terms, and once they're voted in, it's unless they've done something really wrong that would cause them to have to step down. Most of the time, they basically get reviewed by the lawyers each year for their performance, but they also get reviewed by the voters every 6 years. And if the voters don't like the job they've done, then they'll vote them out. But it is also important to say, I think, that it is not the job of the judge to simply do what the majority of people think is the right thing in a particular case. A judge is not supposed to be following the popular opinion. And in fact, one of the things that's important for a judge is to understand that sometimes the right answer, the legally correct answer, is also the politically unpopular answer. And so some of the very best judges reach outcomes sometimes that people don't like, but that are legally appropriate given the system that we have and the facts that are actually introduced in the trial. And so, it can be a lonely position too, because there will be times when a judge does something that ends up on the front page of the newspaper, and there will be people that don't know anything about the case, didn't hear the witnesses, didn't appear, didn't sit in the back of the courtroom to watch things, only know about the case, whatever the headline in the newspaper was, but they feel outraged because the headline of the newspaper made it seem like the judge should have made one decision, and in fact, the judge correctly made a different decision based on the actual evidence that was in front of them. And of course, that from your own experience in front of courts all over the state. So on the one hand, it really is important for judges, I think, to be accountable to the people, but not in any individual case at any individual time. Judges need to have that judicial independence to say that we are a nation of laws and not of men, that we are a nation that follows a set of rules that keep the playing field fair for everyone. And one of the critical, important jobs of judges is to protect the rights of the individual against what's sometimes called the tyranny of the majority. And that's a really important function. If judges did not do that, we would not have had cases like Brown versus Board of Education, which was a critically important case that hit the United States Supreme Court in 1955, and was and desegregated schools in the South, for example. So judges have sometimes served a critical role in implementing laws that are not popular everywhere that they go, but that protect the rights of individuals. We need that too. That's part of our system.
Thank you. What do you think are the roles of judges in ensuring social equity or social justice?
They do have a role to play. It is not the primary role in ensuring social justice. There are other parts of our government and other parts of our community that I would submit have a more important role to play, but judges do have a responsibility to do several things. And so, number one, we as a system need to recognize that our system is flawed. There are biases in our system. We try and correct them. We try and recognize them, but we have not eradicated them yet, and they are there. And so, on the cases that are in front of a judge, I think it's critically important that from a social justice perspective, the judge on a case makes sure that systemic racism, implicit biases, prejudices of every sort, homophobia, misogyny, don't infect the process in a way that leads to an unjust result. And we're not always perfect at that. In fact, we're not even very good at all at that sometimes. But as flawed as it is, being a system of humanity and recognizing the flaws of humanity, it is incumbent upon us to guard against it. So that's one thing that judges need to do. But that's just the beginning of it, I submit. The other thing that judges need to do critically is engage the community, not on the cases that are in front of them, but engage the community as leaders in the community and talk about the role of the judiciary, educate and inform about the things, why our system is the way that it is, and encourage people to advocate for change where they think that there's change. And then within the functioning of the judiciary, advocate for change ourselves. So, as you know, for example, I've been working behind the scenes for a while on a project that I believe will improve our system as a whole and then create a greater level of fairness, not on any individual case necessarily, but in terms of the application and the functioning of the system as a whole. And I think judges have that responsibility, and I would encourage more judges more of the judges that we have to think about their role in a broader system in that way and find ways that we can make reform and change.
Thank you. So, yeah, from what you just said, apart from making judicial decisions on the bench, judges also can formulate policy.
Um, I don't know that it's appropriate
when it comes to the administration of justice,
yes, right.
Or approach or access to justice.
Yes, right. So from the perspective of the functioning of our courts, certainly, it's, I wouldn't want to suggest that judges have a legislative role. They don't.
No, they don't.
The legislature does the legislative job, and the judges do the judicial job. But as administrators of our judicial system, I would submit that judges have a deeper responsibility than anyone else to make sure that the judicial system as a whole is operating fairly. And that means systemic reform when systemic reform is required. And so from an administrative system perspective, yeah, I would love to have more of our judges thinking not just about the cases that are in front of them at any given time, but rather, how is this courthouse functioning within our society as a whole? Are we being fair? Are we being open? Are we providing equal access to people regardless of race, creed, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation? Are we making sure that everybody in this community is protected equally by the protections of our justice system? Are we making sure that they each have access to the privileges that are afforded to our citizens to protect themselves in civil litigation, for example, as well, and give them a fair and equal shot? And the more that we are looking at the functions of the court from that perspective, the more fair it will be for everybody.
Thank you. And talking about access and policy, I think you have this idea of maybe, is it like starting or having a daycare or
right,
a child care for people at the courthouse?
So this is a
little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. So this is something that I've been working on for several years. It actually started in 2018, and when I lost that race in 2018, I sat back for a couple of weeks and kind of thought about what I wanted to do next and whether I would ever run again. And I didn't know whether I would run again, but I did know that getting childcare at our courthouse was a project that I could take on, that no one else was taking on at that time, and that I thought I could make happen one way or the other. So actually, the very first thing I did was I went to my former opponent, who had just beaten me by by that swing of 931 votes. And I told him my idea and said, if you join me in this, then it's really about good public policy and not just about politics. So would you join me? And I was grateful that he said yes. And then I went to all of the other judges and got their support, and then went to the county commissioners, and we're exploring ways to do it. The idea is this: we don't have childcare at our courthouse, and we need to have it, not just for county employees, although for them too, but for defendants, for victims of crime, for witnesses, and especially for jurors. The fact that we don't have childcare for jurors acts as a structural barrier that prevents full participation in our jury system by, let's face it, mostly single mothers and mostly below a certain age and income threshold. And the fact that those voices are therefore less represented in our jury pools than they otherwise would be has a skewing and distortive effect on every jury outcome where those voices aren't in the room as the case is being decided. Now, it may not mean that any particular case is decided differently for the absence of those voices, but we'll never know because those voices aren't there. And over the course of the entire functioning of the system, it has to have a distortive effect. And so the idea is that if we get a drop-in childcare system for our jurors, it will allow parts of our society to participate more fully than they otherwise do. And I mean, that is a fundamentally democratic idea. And I don't mean like democratic as in Democratic Party. That is a fundamental, cornerstone of our democracy as a whole, that we have full citizen participation. And this is just a little thing that I think we can do. It'll cost a little bit of money. It will cost, it will require a little bit of advanced planning and work, but it is not impossible. And other states have had systems sort of kind of like this, and they've worked well. So I think we have a model that we can build from, and over the course of the next year or so, whether I get elected or not, I am determined to try and push this through, and will hopefully other people will agree with me.
Yes. I'm going to go back to the race you
Oh,
ran in
I can't hear you all of a
2018,
sudden.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Emmanuel.
Can you hear me now?
Nope. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
now I can hear you. I'm sorry.
great. You ran a close race in 2018.
Yeah.
What are those lessons you learned from that race?
Well, I think the challenge of any race, this one, the last one, is to try and stay true to your message, stay true to yourself, stay true to your values, speak your mind in the way that is authentic and in a way that people can understand what it is that you offer. We're never going to do that perfectly. We've all made mistakes at one point or another out on the campaign trail. But over time, carefully explaining to the voters, here's why they should vote to you. That is, and then trusting them to make the decision. As I said, I lost in 2018 by just a little bit, but I'm at peace with that. I mean, I put a consistent message out there that said, this is who I am, and these are the reasons why I think you should vote for me. Some folks are going to agree with that. Some folks are going to go a different way, and that's okay too. I mean, this is, if you make it only about yourself, if you make it about satisfying your own ego, sooner or later, that either running as a candidate or doing the actual job after the election will become frustrating. If you approach it all from beginning to end as a position of service, it can be enormously rewarding. I went out into the community. It was easier in 2018, of course, before the pandemic, but I spent as much time listening to people as I did sort of broadcasting my own message. And those conversations will make me a better judge if I end up on the bench. Understanding how transportation issues in our community and food deserts in our community, the disproportionate number of schools with facilities problems in neighborhoods that have other problems as well, and the overlap of those issues. Understanding how all those pieces come together and affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. It's not going to decide any case that's in front of me, I wouldn't expect as a judge, but it will allow me to understand the challenges of the witnesses, the challenges of the jurors, the challenges of the defendants in a different and fuller way than if I sat up in an ivory tower all day and said, well, this is all about me. So the way one runs one's race, I think, does matter a lot. And getting out into the community in 2018 was richly rewarding in its own right. It is my regret we haven't really been able to do anywhere near as much of that in 2020 because of the pandemic. But whether I win or lose, I intend to continue having those connections because it leads to a richer life as much as anything else.
Thank you. I was talking to the community, listening to their grievances, their comments, and all that. How has that affected the kind of judicial philosophy you will follow if you were to get elected?
Well, I think that the judicial, I'm running for a trial court position, so the judicial philosophy of any judge, a trial judge, really needs to be about process, about fairness, about am I giving everyone, it's not about ideology. It's about, am I giving everyone an equal opportunity to be heard? Am I creating a system that allows everyone an opportunity to find out the things they need to find out to support their case or to defend their case? Am I creating a system that doesn't drag the case on for too long or foreshorten it too much so that it cheats one side or the other of the opportunities to have their day in court. So that has to be the philosophy of a trial judge. And I'm not sure that the communications that I've had out in the community necessarily directly affect that philosophy, except to the extent that I understand, okay, this juror or this defendant or this person that's coming on for a probation hearing or whatever, this person rode 2 hours on a bus to get here, and so, or they're going to have to. And so let's, do we need to have this hearing at 8:30 in the morning, or can we have this hearing at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10:30 in the morning? Or what happens if we have it scheduled at 3:30 in the afternoon? Is there a childcare issue once schools are out? I'm not sure that's going to affect any particular outcome necessarily in a case, but one of the things that it does do is remove some of the stressors that prevent a litigant or a defendant or a juror from being able to focus exclusively on the important matter that they're in court for in the first place.
Thank you. In 2016, your son, Eamon, was diagnosed, was diagnosed with diabetes.
That's correct.
What was that experience for you as a father, and what was it like for you as a family?
Well, it's devastating. I mean, that is a terrible disease. So he has type 1 diabetes, and we have had to reorient a huge part of our lives around the needs of maintaining his health and his safety. And we were very blessed, quite frankly, that I have a good job, I have a stable employment, I am able to sustain my family so that my wife could take time to focus on his needs. Not every family has that. And, it is an enormously expensive disease. And so you look at, the national discussion about healthcare, for example. There's been lots of discussions about how much a bottle of insulin costs. It can be $250 here in the United States. In Canada, it's $25. You don't even need a prescription for it. And so that leads to some discussions about differences in healthcare system, but knowing how those things can happen. I think about how a single parent, with a lower paying job, how could they possibly afford, $250 bottles of insulin? And it's not just that, it's also being up all night to make sure that the child is safe, because there will be times when the insulin levels, the blood glucose levels rise too high or drop too low. And all of those things are really difficult to manage coming from a position of privilege and comfort and security, as I've had as a successful lawyer in private practice, and to imagine what it must be like for people that have job insecurity, that have housing insecurity, that have transportation insecurity, that have healthcare insecurity, that have nutrition insecurity. And all of those things piled on top of each other make managing a disease, that disease or other diseases, so much more difficult. And when you have some window into that, I think it becomes possible to develop a different sort of empathy for people. And surely that it may not change the outcome of a case, but we want our judges to have that sort of empathy and that sort of humility. So, this is obviously not something that anyone would ever celebrate, but the strength that my son and that my wife in particular have demonstrated and found in themselves as we negotiate through this disease process has been inspiring and has been humbling.
Thank you. So, what has it been like to run a campaign during the pandemic and having a child that you have to manage what they eat? You have to watch everything they consume, and at the same time also maintain a career.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So my son is old enough that he's pretty independent now, and so that requires a little bit less of my day-to-day time. He's very capable of taking care of that part of his life, thankfully. But the rest of it, the pandemic certainly has changed every part of how one campaigns. I remember in 2018 marching in the Northland 4th of July parade, and that was a way to get to talk to voters and to meet people. And of course, we haven't had any parades. We haven't had any in-person candidate forums. None of us are knocking on doors and talking to people at their houses. There's less of those sorts of interactions. So that's been a challenge. And then, of course, on the court side of things, as you know from your own career, there hasn't been, there have been very, very few civil cases going to trial since the pandemic began. And so we have an enormous backlog of those cases that are going to have to get some attention in 2021 and in 2022. And it's going to take a couple of years. We've had very few actual criminal cases either, which raises a whole other series of concerns. We have folks that are sitting in our jail that have never been convicted of anything, and that are awaiting their day in court. And to be sitting but the reason they're there is because they can't afford bond. Sometimes even just, a couple $100s worth of bond. And in a pandemic, that can be the difference between health and safety on the one hand and getting a disease process on the other. We've seen stories of incarceration leading to infection in the coronavirus situation. And so it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for our legal system as a whole. I think the challenges are we're still in the very early phases of figuring out how to solve that. I would welcome your thoughts on it as well. But I can tell you that as a practicing lawyer, it's going to be a long while before the backlog of cases that started in March work through the system. And if I'm fortunate enough to be a judge next year, based on November's election, it will be a challenge unlike any challenge that current judges have ever faced. We've just simply never had this before, and we're going to have to find ways to solve that problem, both in terms of maintaining case discipline and keeping cases moving through the system, but also making sure that as we do that we don't create injustice for the litigants, which is also, there's a very real risk of that. If we're just pushing cases along now, because we have so many to work through and we don't have enough time to give attention to every case in the way that we did, we will hurt people. And so that is something that we're going to have to figure out, but it will require the judge in particular every now and then to say, let's slow down. I know that we've got these, it's a very full docket right now, but we need to slow down and make sure that this case gets the attention that it deserves at this moment. And, that's a balancing test that we'll just have to figure that out as we go, quite frankly.
Creating balance between speed and justice.
I think that's right.
As people keep going to, people have started going to the polls. Some people have voted for you, some have not. Right. Some have gotten to the polls, they don't know who to choose. What do you want to say to people who are not sure whether to vote for you or to vote for your opponent? What should they have in mind when they go to the polls and see your name on the ballot?
Well, I hope that they have the number one thing that they can do is they can do research before they get to the polls and see my name on the ballot. I would like voters that have done some research on their own. We each have websites. We're not hard to find, and I would ask folks to look and form their own conclusions. I understand that not every voter is going to vote for me, and that's okay. That's part of a democratic process, and however that works out is however that will work out. But to not be able to recognize the differences because they haven't done the research, that makes me sad. So what I would say about myself is that I have 24 years of trial experience. I am highly recommended by the Columbus Bar Association. So the Columbus Bar Association every year gets a panel of 30 lawyers, give or take. I think it's about 30 lawyers. Half are Republican, half are Democrat. So it's a bipartisan panel. And that panel looks at the candidates. And And then they give them one of three ratings: highly recommended, which requires a consensus of at least 60%, recommended, which is 50-50, or not recommended, which is a consensus of at least 70% of the people. Well, in my race, they looked at me and they rated me highly recommended, their highest rating. Those are folks that are criminal lawyers and civil lawyers. They're folks that are plaintiffs' lawyers and defense lawyers. They're Democrats and Republicans. They looked at me and at my record over the course of 24 years. A lot of them know me, frankly. A lot of them were on the other side of one of my cases or another of my cases at one time or another. And they have formed the conclusion that I'm the type of person that should be serving our community on the bench. And I'm deeply flattered by that. The other part of the Columbus Bar Association process is then they do a survey of all of the lawyers in the Columbus Bar Association and say, for each judicial race, who would you prefer to win? This person or that person? And I'm sure you got one of those surveys in your email as a practicing attorney in town. When all of those results were tabulated, I was the preferred candidate in my race by 85.5% of the people that voted, the lawyers that voted. Again, plaintiffs' lawyers and defendants' lawyers, criminal lawyers and civil lawyers. There's just a broad consensus amongst the Columbus Bar, the people that know what it takes to be a judge, that know what it's like to appear in front of a judge, that I'm the right person. And I'm grateful for that. I appreciate that support.
Thank you. If people want to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
Thank you. So at the bottom of the screen, I see you've got my campaign website, www.carlaveni.com. That's a great place to visit and learn about a couple of things. One, you could learn a little bit more about my judicial philosophy. Two, you learn a little bit about my biography. But three, you can also learn about my initiatives. So I have, for example, a 2.5-minute short form video about my efforts to bring childcare. That's there. And I really hope that folks watch that. That's, as I said, a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. So that you can do that. You also can go to Facebook and look up my Judicial Campaign page, Carl Aveni for Common Pleas Judge, on Facebook, and that will show you all of the endorsements that I've gotten. And I've been very fortunate. I've gotten endorsements by every organization that I have appeared for and asked for their endorsement, every single one of them. So I have a broad array of support from the teachers organizations, the Franklin County Council of Education Associations, the Columbus Education Association, firefighters, so the International Association of Firefighters Local 67, the building trades, the Columbus Building Trades Council, the Columbus Labor Council, AFL-CIO. So a broad array of working groups, working families, professional organizations, and of course the lawyers themselves. And I'm very proud and grateful to have that sort of broad base of support. If elected, I will work every day to redeem that level of faith, and I invite people to hold me accountable.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Carl, for joining us in this episode of Legal Angle.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Right. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Halawale. Until next time, stay safe.
Bye now.